Yesterday, the Senate was having a hearing where they started talking about the For the People Act. Ted Cruz, of course, is totally against this. He doesn't want people to have the right to vote. And Amy Klobuchar absolutely laid into Ted, not only about his unwillingness to support the For the People Act, but his willingness to try to overturn a Democratic election here in the United States. And during this scolding that he was receiving, Ted Cruz clearly couldn't care less because he spent the whole time scrolling through his phone. Take a look at the video.
To the day of the insurrection, to January 6th, when in fact you, Senator Cruz, not all of your colleagues here today, you were contesting the Electoral College. You were leading, one of the leaders on the effort to say that the election results were not correct. And so you wonder why we want to make sure that people have the right to vote. Well, it's because of this kind of rhetoric and this kind of behavior and an insurrection at the Capitol and a former president that is still maintaining that he somehow won the election when we all know it's not true. And so that's why, if you ask why we are still interested in protecting our democracy from that day of January 6th on, I think that's your answer.
You know, Ted, if I was sitting there being accused by someone of being okay with an insurrection and, of course, trying to overturn the results of a democratically held election here in the United States, I'd probably care about it a little bit, right? I wouldn't just flip through my phone, things are happening, who's talking, what? Huh? Yeah, that total BS what you just said there, Amy. Boom. Because that is basically how he responded. But this is ridiculous. Ted Cruz is such a smug jackass that it's really hard to talk about him without saying that he has one of the most punchable faces in the entire United States Senate. But I think he does. Not that I would, and not that anybody should, obviously, but for the love of God, Ted, even if you weren't sitting there getting scolded, aren't you supposed to be at least paying attention? Don't you have a job to do in that Senate? Instead, it looks like you spend all your time on Twitter, scrolling through social media, getting in fights with people who end up kicking your butt every day. And you don't even want to pay attention to what Klobuchar is saying. And Klobuchar, for the record, was making a great point. You know, Ted Cruz is like, well, we got to protect our elections. Cool. For the People Act actually does that. And if you want to talk about people who aren't protecting elections here in the United States, why don't you go talk to your little Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell, ask him why he blocked every single bipartisan effort to fund election security here in the United States that came up during the Trump years. You had plenty of opportunities to secure elections here in the United States, but Mitch McConnell single-handedly held it up. And again, these were all bipartisan efforts. You had Republicans and Democrats for once coming together, working on this legislation, killed by sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk for too long. So no, Ted, you don't get to take the high ground. You don't get to be smug. You don't get to act like you're better than everybody in that chamber. Everything Klobuchar said was true. And you pretended like you didn't even hear it, which is pretty much exactly what you're doing with the American people. They support this legislation. They want this to be a thing, including your Republicans, by the way. But you're tuning them out, just like you tuned out Klobuchar. Thanks for watching, and if you like what you saw, don't forget to like, comment, share, and most importantly, subscribe to our Ring of Fire channel here.